All right, why don't we go ahead and kick it off? Thank you to everybody who has joined today for what I anticipate to be a really great and informative webinar about making the move from siloed hardware. We've got an incredible set of panelists today, as well as Morris Panner, the CEO of Ombra Health, who I will go ahead and turn it over to right now to really kick us off and introduce the topic for today. So Morris, over to you.
Hey, thank you, Chantel. And I get the distinct honor of introducing our panelists. So here we are coming out of COVID. And what's interesting about the team we have to talk to you today is they, I think, probably were really in the belly of the beast. And they saw some of the frustrations that the old infrastructure resulted in. And they also saw some of the possibilities of this new infrastructure. So it really is, I think, a hinge moment. And I'm so excited to introduce Matt Hyatt. One of the things that I think Matt saw was some of the interplay of what was happening in California and some of the complexities of interoperating with other systems. So I'm excited to hear about that. And then Lori Perry and Jen Regan, in some ways were in a very tough spot because they were inside of one of the world leading children's hospitals. And much of what was mystifying about the pandemic was the triaging of care that went on. And I don't know, it sort of seems like it's a little bit in the rearview mirror right now, but a lot of painful decisions around access and other things were being made. And Lori and Jen were really scrambling to make sure that they could provide care. So I think some of this today feels technical, but it's deeply personal. And I think that is part of what I love about technology businesses is they're people businesses. And these are the people who have been on the front lines, remain on the front lines. And I think they can provide you with a lot of the tips and tricks around fighting these good fights and getting the outcomes that you want to help people. And it's not easy. And then let me properly introduce Chantel Hopper, who is our VP of Customer Success. And Chantel is somebody who I also love to bring into healthcare, which is she is, I think, representing some of what is new about healthcare today, which is this trend towards making it about people and consumers. And her last sort of orientation was in the entertainment industry. And if we can make healthcare as user-friendly as some of our great entertainment experiences, I think that will be a big step forward. So she's been partnering with all of our customers, her and her team, to try to make the experience better, which is also a big part of what this transformation in infrastructure represents. So that's who we have today. It's going to be a great group. And they are also, as you put in questions, if we don't get to them, they will reach out to you after. We'll make sure that there's an easy way to be able to pick their brain. And so if you're shy or whatever, we'll make sure you can connect in a way that's comfortable for you. Okay, next slide. So I only have one quick slide, and maybe I've really sort of implicitly done it already. We are at a time when healthcare data is becoming helpful. And what has happened up until now is when I talk to providers, they talk to me about healthcare data as a net drain. A typical interaction with a provider today is this, they are not even looking at you because they are struggling to enter data. And what we're trying to do now is making data a asset that is going to really change the way we do care. Telehealth is helping that. And one of the things I think all of us saw during the pandemic was how important telehealth. It's not perfect for every use case, but it can be revolutionary. Also, and this is where data comes to bear, so much is happening around clinical and research workflows so that people are able to use information to give cutting edge care. And we see this in immunotherapy. We see it particularly in pediatrics, which is why it's kind of fun to have people from the pediatric world on. It's hard to find, happily, there are not a ton of sick kids in the kind of way that adults tend to get sicker in a bigger percentage of the population. But when the kids are sick, you want to try to help them, and you need to find the cohort, and that will often span multiple institutions and multiple geographies, and that collaboration is really important. And then finally, this started before, but with 21st Century Cures Act, everybody has to be thinking about how are we going to be able to answer patient demands, requests, desires, however you want to put it, for accessibility. And that's something that happily, I think our nation is moving towards. And it's not the easiest thing in the world. And being part of a vendor community that is sometimes guilty of not making it as easy as it could be, we're always trying to find ways to improve. And we're learning a lot from the team on the phone today. So that's the framework of what we're trying to accomplish today against a backdrop of people who live the experience of not being able to give people access to care because it was literally siloed away. And we can never let that happen again. And this is really a time where out of great tragedy is going to come great good. And I think this is one of those great examples. So let me turn it over to Chantel, who can moderate our outstanding panel today. Thank you all.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Morris. I'm really excited to dive into some of these topics today, and to echo you, we're going to have some great insights from this panel that we have on board. So we're going to kind of divide this into 3 sections. And our first section is really about making the shift to the cloud. And so the first question, and Matt, I'll start with you on this one. Tell me about how CDs impact the daily workflow of administrators and physicians, really any of the staff at UCSD.
Yeah, and thanks, Chantel. It's a great question. It's what I've lived and breathed now for a very long time, is just generally how we're getting the imaging for our patients, you know, out into the world, right? Out into our clinical world, our enterprise, to the specialists, to the people providing the clinical care. And then, you know, the way that filters down, you know, to that patient experience, ultimately. So CDs in particular, they come with a unique set of challenges. It's a physical media. It's something that, you know, we're dealing with daily issues with discs or corruptions, or, you know, one of my frustrations living in this world that we all inhabit is there's really no standard for what you get on a disc. Everybody kind of does it a little bit differently. You know, so for us at UC San Diego Health, a driving force behind picking or, you know, landing on a solution internally and then working with others externally was the way in which we can best ingest these sort of, you know, it's kind of becoming maybe a little bit of a legacy, but it's still there pretty strong, is ingesting imaging, patient imaging on disk. You know, so for us, the impact of the daily workflow is significant. We're a specialty heavy organization. A lot of people seek care at UCSD, you know, oncology, transplant, you name it. Every specialty we have here, like most large organizations. So we have a lot of patients coming here to get care. Right. And as part of that process, the clinical staff, the physicians, the nurses, the people providing the care need to see the patient imaging, prior patient imaging, before they'll even schedule appointments or be able to schedule appointments. So it's a huge impact, and that turnaround time is paramount to making sure we're providing care in a timely manner to these patients.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting way to sort of an interesting framework to think about with the CDs. Is there's the point of ingestion, but there's also the dissemination of those studies into the organization to get to the point that they need to get to in a timely manner, which poses a challenge because it's not instantaneous from upload to being available for the clinician that might need to view it.
Absolutely, yeah, and you know, you kind of summed it up perfectly there. The culture has shifted really rapidly. We kind of joke internally a little bit that we'll solve a problem that existed with a new technology that people are very happy about and very excited about, you know, understandably. And then that new thing that they have available to them now, you know, 3 weeks, a month in, if it doesn't work quite right, you know, they're knocking your door down to make sure that, you know, what's going on, that we need this. It's critical to us. But, you know, again, we kind of in the tech world maybe joke about that a little bit, but I think it's important to understand just how impactful these technology changes are to the whole process, from at least in this case, from the moment somebody puts a disc in a computer to that clinical person making a critical decision for a patient, and the speed at which this is changing in our industry is fascinating, and I think gives us unique opportunities, but also unique challenges to overcome.
Yeah, the role that technology can play in really reducing that turnaround time, I think is really important. But it's those needs and demands are constantly shifting as well. Lori, I'll turn it over to you at Cincinnati Children's. How do you see CDs impacting the daily workflow of clinical staff, administrative staff, et cetera?
I think CDs are still impacting our workflow more than they should be. Unfortunately, we have families and even users in the institution who no longer have a disk drive in their computers, but we're still importing hundreds of disks every week, and doing it with, I would say we're fairly efficient at the way we import CDs. We do have a good process for it, and we manage it well. But the numbers of CDs, thankfully, are starting to go down. And I think the pandemic had a lot to do with that. We have been transitioning to some degree further and further away from disks and more electronic image transfer, which is good, but brings with its own challenges, of course, that are entirely different than the disks. But we do have that issue of users in the organization not even having disk drives. So we have rolled out disk upload to many of our partner departments throughout the hospital. Orthopedics, for example, uploads their own disks on a daily basis, but they refresh their computers, and then today they have disk drives, tomorrow they don't. So you have these kind of ongoing problems that you have to deal with in that respect. So I think that, like Matt said, we have a lot of technology issues with the disks. We're still getting disks that are non-DICOM that come in. You can't tell that initially, and you have to do a lot of investigating to figure it out. And then there's also the issue of remote support dealing with physical disks and trying to figure out methods of getting onto that computer to see what's on the disk, but not being able to see the physical disk to know, is there even anything on it? I don't know. And trying to direct the user to look at the little lines on the disk. Does it have anything burned on it? I mean, it's there's a lot of crazy things that happen when you're remote and you're trying to support people at the hospital with physical disks. So I feel like we have a long way to go with disks and getting rid of them. It's not going to happen for quite a while, unfortunately. And I think maybe as we talk more about the image transfer, electronic transfer, we'll probably get back to this a little bit further.
Definitely. That's such an interesting point, and one I don't think we think about often. There's the issue of the hardware and the actual technology, but thinking about supporting the act of utilizing or trying to leverage that technology is like an added set of challenges that was probably totally enhanced by this remote environment that we all found ourselves in a little over a year ago. Jen, anything that you want to add from your perspective in regards to the sort of challenges of CDs?
We also get, as Laura said, we get lots of discs from lots of places, and we get a ton from, patients who've had imaging overseas, and they may have brought the discs with them. And so the DICOM on those discs could be very different from what our PACS will allow, or, just what we can take into our system. So, we definitely have challenges with that as well. And even electronically, those will still cause challenges, but it's definitely, I think we can work around it a little bit better. But discs are definitely something I would like to see go by the wayside. The support is definitely difficult with the discs. So
we face similar challenges as well. So I can relate. I think that is a great opportunity for us to jump to the next question. So, we talked about image management or electronic transfer and image management solutions that are sort of emerging. And Jen, I'll start with you on this question. When selecting an image management solution, whether it was in the past or currently, what were some of your key, both clinical considerations as well as IT considerations, and any other considerations that are not exactly, that we can't bucket into clinical or IT?
Oh, sorry, couldn't get off mute there. So yeah, we spent a lot of time looking for a solution to getting images into our hospital. We demoed systems, and we found in demoing different systems, we were able to come up with a pretty good list of, what we needed, a good way to, an easy way for users and to get users to send images to us. A good network of hospitals on those systems. At least in the beginning, we kind of felt like we needed a good network of hospitals on the system itself that we were demoing. An easy way to connect with those institutions. From an IT side, we needed obviously to be safe and secure, because our security was definitely going to come down on us if it wasn't. So I know I'm leaving a lot out. I'm going to let Lori kind of jump in there too, because she kind of led a lot of that with me and some of the other team members. But Lori, what else am I missing there?
Oh, you covered a lot of it. Like Jen said, we did an extensive search when we were going to get a new image sharing vendor. We actually had this opportunity where the vendor we had been using was going out of business, and we had a year to find a new vendor. So we were looking for a solution. Basically, we wanted to find the optimal solution for our situation. And what we found as we started looking at all of these different vendors was that, well, first of all, everyone has a vendor. So everybody has to choose a vendor, and you get images from so many different places. You have a little power over how you're going to receive those images if that site already owns a system that they have purchased. So what we learned very quickly was that we needed to be able to accommodate whatever was out there. So we installed gateways for all of the major vendors, and really we ended up with about 5 gateways. And we still did that search, and we came up with our own vendor that we then purchased. And for sites that didn't have their own vendor, or really were more referral sites rather than, the other way around, but we're a referral site at Cincinnati Children's. We receive images from all over the world. Right. But the places who are doing the image sending, who really don't care as much about it, were very willing to install the gateway for our vendor. So is what we found. So we ended up with this solution that pulls images from these 5 different gateways, and all the images come into our internal system. So we get images through the vendor that we purchased. We also get images through all of these other systems, and everything is consolidated into an internal system through a gateway. And in that internal system, we have our reading room technologists that are watching the system continuously throughout the day. They are monitoring the system and importing the images. And one of the key factors that we were looking for was the ability to do patient, patient reconciliation well. So we wanted a system that could query the PACS, find that patient, and populate the demographics automatically. We didn't want users to have to press a button and wait for something to pull back. We wanted automatic, I found the patient, this is the information, click a button and archive it to PACS. And that's why we ended up with the solution that we have. The vendor for our internal enterprise imaging system actually had that capability, probably better than any other vendor on the market in the image sharing area. So we ended up with all of these gateways, and we, to this day, still use that same method. It allows us to still continue to consolidate, and it keeps our users in one place, which is really important internally. We wanted to not have to train people on 6 different systems. We wanted them to be able to use one system on a daily basis. So for the most part, those users are in that system, and if they have issues that require accessing the gateways, then that comes to our informatics team. But it's not a common problem. It's something that we can manage very well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I'm hearing, ease of use for the end users, whether that's the folks who are sending imaging in, as well as for your internal users who are interacting with the system on a daily basis. The network of the platform, the size of it, Security, obviously, that makes a ton of sense. And also the technology piece of it as well, right? You talked about the reconciliation of information, which is a really key part of that process. So Matt, I'll turn to you. Anything that you want to add from your perspective when it comes to an image management solution? What's important to you, or what was important to you all?
Yeah, great. I mean, Lori and Jen covered so much of it. And I already touched on one part, which was turnaround time. For us, that was a huge consideration or factor in choosing a solution. We had some things in place that weren't working great for us. For us, our orthopedics department was the loudest voice in the room, and rightfully so. So our turnaround times were, 24 hours to 48 hours. And like I said, at our institution where patients aren't even able to make a scheduled appointment, to receive care until the clinical folks have actually looked at the images, this is a huge dissatisfier across the spectrum. So that was a big solution for us, and a consideration of what we're talking about. We went from potentially days to minutes in some cases in providing that imaging. And whereas before they had to physically bring a disc in, hand it to a person to upload it, that still happens, as we already talked about. But the patients and referral site or referring sites now have the ability to share with us electronically, and it's really changed the game for us in terms of providing that level of care that we need to all be focusing on. And then two was choosing a solution that was scalable. For us, it was we were answering some very specific needs internally, but we saw potential in the product we chose, and we just kind of made some assumptions that we'd see organic growth based on how well it worked, and that's exactly what we've seen. And with inside and outside imaging is technology. If it's easily scalable, that's a big deal from an administrative management perspective, cost, right, all that. And we've been able to realize that with the path we've chosen, where it's worked well, it's answered a lot of needs, and we've been able to grow it as members in our enterprise community have seen the use and the benefit of using this type of technology. They're coming to us now and saying, "Hey, these are the problems I have, and can we jump on board?" And we say, "Of course."
Right. So the consideration of sort of problems or challenges today, but also thinking about the future, thinking towards the future, and the ability for that solution to adapt and grow and kind of expand in its use at your facility.
Absolutely.
I think one thing that you brought up, which I find really fascinating, just between the three of you, we've heard mentions of so many different stakeholders, right? Obviously the IT staff, you've got the clinical staff. We talked about referring providers. Matt also talked about patients. There are so many different stakeholders, I think, that need to be considered in this process. Before we jump to the next section, I'll open this up to the three of you. Any advice that you have to maybe folks who are listening in, going through the assessment of an image management solution, on the process or the criteria that they should be considering?
I'll jump back in.
Thanks, Matt.
I think it goes without saying, but it can get lost in the mix. The patient experience that, it all filters down to there, right? The whole point, right, of us collectively doing what we do, from the front desk staff to the physicians, the nurses, to us on the back end IT, is providing an experience that, benefits our patients. But, each cog in that wheel is so important. And if you have a breakdown anywhere, it can be problematic. And so I guess it's really taking a step back, a holistic approach. I'm guilty, like everyone else, of focusing on the things that affect me most immediately. But I think it is helpful to take a step back and really look at, from end to end, who has, where the touch points are, and then how it affects the next people in the, on down the line. And that's been helpful in this process. And like we already mentioned, the technology is evolving, it's changing, and things like that. So, it's helpful to try to look a little bit into the future and say, okay, maybe we'll set the framework that will allow us to get where we are to that next step, if we have those pieces in place. So that would be a little bit hard to plan for some of the unknowns, but right, I think it's a useful mental exercise at the very least.
Yeah, and I would add to that, if your institution can, we were pretty lucky that we could, but demoing some of these systems was a huge advantage for us. A lot of the systems are willing to give you some demoing capabilities. May not be the whole full scale software platform, but most that we have found that most were willing to give us, rights and be able to send and try it out for a week, a month, whatever their system allowed. But that really allowed us to kind of see what we needed. We thought we knew what we needed, and then it kind of changed over the time of us demoing some of this. Like we had said before, we thought we needed a system that had all of these connections already made between institutions, and it turned out we really didn't need that at all. We found a better working way. So, and that we were only able to find that by demoing multiple solutions. So, if you have the ability, that I think was a huge benefit for us here at Children's.
And I would add that another thing that I think people should look at and consider is facility to facility transfer. Not, that should be the focus or the center way that you get imaging from other facilities, is a platform that allows you to transfer electronically in the cloud. I think a lot of smaller institutions these days are going to other systems where they're sort of sending it up to the cloud, and then they're sending emails that will actually go to the other sites, and then you have to download the images and upload them to your PACS. And I'm seeing a lot of that from smaller facilities these days. I haven't done a lot of investigating into it, but I would recommend that, like Matt said, thinking about that whole process from end to end, not just how are you going to send the images, but how is the other facility going to receive these images?
Right.
Thinking a little bit higher, a little bit bigger, and also addressing some of the security concerns at the outset, recognizing that the vendors have addressed security and they have very secure systems that they've already built for this purpose. This is why you're purchasing a vendor and not doing it yourself. Right. So what I find with a lot of the hospitals that we worked with, smaller hospitals in particular, is this over concern about security and not trusting the vendors and doing too much investigation into it. And it really, or requiring BAAs with every facility that you're going to transfer images with. None of that's necessary, and people really get carried away with it. And I think they're overlooking the fact that we need to make this patient care centralized. We need to think about patient care, and that's what we're doing here. We're not just doing something technology based. We're not just transferring images. We're facilitating patient care, especially today.
I think that's an incredibly powerful and fantastic way to take us out of this first section and into our second, which is going to be focused around outbound sharing. Lori, I'm going to turn this one to you to start. We've talked about stakeholders a little bit in the previous section. I think positive relationships with your referring facilities, with your physicians, with your patients, I'll add that in there as well, is really critical for maintaining growth and customer satisfaction. How is Cincinnati Children's ensuring that imaging and or reports, I think that's a really key component when we're thinking about image sharing, is the reports as well. How are you all making sure, or how are you guys approaching the sharing of imaging and reports with other institutions and physicians as rapidly, and I'll add in as easily as possible?
That's a good question. And I think that, again, we try to simplify things as much as possible, especially for our users. We certainly want to disseminate that role. We do not want that role to live only within the imaging informatics support team, for example. That needs to be rolled out so that users within the hospital have the ability to do this themselves. And we have rolled that out to radiology technologists, reading room assistants, and people within our department have the ability to just send through a direct destination in PACS. And this is my mantra: is as soon as we have a centralized email address, and as soon as I see a bunch of emails going back and forth with downloading images, sending me a link and you download the images, that's taking 10 times as long as it takes to just press a button in PACS and send those images. So I try to harp on the fact that we need to set up direct destinations, make this systematic. Don't do this one-off manual image upload workflow that is problematic from everyone's perspective. So we try to centralize it. We build destinations in the PACS. I would say we do not routinely share the report as SR objects. We're not doing that today. Maybe something that we would do in the future. For right now, reports are shared via fax and they have to be requested with an ROI. So that may come in the future. I know that we've seen that growing from other facilities. We're receiving a lot of SR reports. It's actually causing some problems in our packs, and more DICOM that the systems don't like, and more problems to solve. But I know we're headed in that direction, and it's useful information for clinicians when they're taking care of the patients, for sure.
Definitely. Jen, anything you want to add?
No, I think that probably covers it. We also have maybe not so much with referring facilities, but just different internal areas. We've given some of our clinics abilities to send their own links to patients, to other institutions where they might have received imaging. And so they send their own links, and that patient or that facility can go ahead and upload images directly to a certain department in our hospital. So, I think kind of disseminating that, like Lori said, and just kind of growing this network with just internal as well. And then they send it out to other areas and help get more imaging quicker into the hospital.
Right. So not just thinking about the external network you're connected to, your own
Mm-hmm.
internal decentralization of the ability for folks to send and receive imaging so that there is no bottleneck in one particular area.
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Perfect.
Matt, I'll turn it over to you. Any other comments here?
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, Lori and Jen have summed it up really well, so I won't belabor most of those points. But when we first started on this journey a handful of years ago, and we weren't dipping our toes and we were jumping straight into the deep end, and not just kind of figuring things out as we went, it was clear to us right away, as Lori's mentioned, that other facilities, large and small, at least regionally for us, but even broader than that, were already using their own vendor, their own solution, all this stuff. And we ran into all the same issues Lori's mentioned with security, policy, procedure, at other places internally. So we took a tack where we said, we're going to go out like Cincinnati Children's did. We're going to install as many of the other vendor gateways that exist out in the community as we can. So we just went through our internal security process. We talked with the vendors. We did the whole thing. We installed their technology and inside our four walls. And then that way we were able to go out to community members and say, hey, okay, what solution do you use? Great. We have that in place. There's really nothing more than setting up that end-to-end kind of touch point. And again, to Lori's point, setting up direct destinations within PAC systems are hugely important and impactful, because it does allow end users within the institutions to just click a button and off the images go. And as part of that continuum of care, especially at a place like UC San Diego, where we have stroke transfers, trauma transfers, there's a lot of clinical care that happens, and the time it's happening is very, very short to make clinical decisions. So that's important. But just the general patient walking through the door, seeing their primary care physician, that's just as important that we get that information transferred as quickly as possible. So the only other part I'd say about it is there's a relational component, at least on the back end, that I'm trying to tap into, where it's a bit old school these days, right? Where you have technology and buttons and all this stuff, and the vendors are really giving us a lot of great tools, but sometimes picking up the phone and calling somebody on the other end and saying, hey, I talked to this person, they talked to that person, they're having a hard time, let's just figure this out. And I mean, I just yesterday, probably 24 hours ago, had a phone call like this with another healthcare system, heart transplant patient, couldn't get the images, everybody talked to everybody, and I, we picked up the phone and said, let's just take care of this. We got it all worked out. And then, that has sparked a whole nother conversation that we're going to be able to hopefully solve that problem with technology down the road. So, yeah.
That's really awesome to hear. I think one thing I sort of heard from all of you is not just having one way to do the sharing, but having a few different ways depending on who you're working with, and being adaptive in that regard as well is really important, because not everybody's going to have the same solution, process, et cetera. I'm going to jump to our next question. And Morris, I'm actually going to turn to you on this one. I know this is something that's really top of mind for a lot of facilities providers in the space. We're hearing a lot about the Cures Act and sort of the mandates of the Cures Act to provide patient access to imaging. I know you talk to providers and institutions often. What sort of initiatives are you seeing across organizations to improve the patient experience, as per the Cures Act?
Yeah, great question. And we are at the beginning of a journey around how the regulators are going to think about information access. And I think the focus initially has been on EMR data. But what's been nice is I think institutions have understood that imaging data is coming, and that the way to do that is to think about the framework in which you want to interact with your patient. So we've seen tremendous interest in developing a richer patient portal experience, in being able to engage patients and referring physicians in a way that actually is pretty good both for the patient, the referrer, and the institution, because it tends to bond, ironically, making it more accessible and easier to move around, makes the information bond people to the institution, because they come to view them as trusted advisors in this process. And they go to one central location where they can see their profile, and they really get very excited to be able to have access to all of that and be able to have a complete conversation. The biggest problem we continue to hear about is effectively because the pressure is so intense that often people give up on getting relevant context information. They do the best they can with what they have. And this has been the biggest transformation that I think will really dramatically improve care.
Yeah. That sort of is a nice transition, I think, into our next question, which, Matt, I'll turn to you first. And I want to build on the question that we have on the screen here. So speaking of patients in general, Morris just touched on the access to the imaging. So I would love to hear about that and how you're approaching it at UCSD. But also I'm curious, do you think about enabling or empowering patients to also upload their imaging in advance of an appointment? And just kind of talking about how you guys are thinking about both inbound and outbound patient workflows.
Yeah, great. It is a good question, and it is so poignant right now. Obviously, the Cures Act is nudging, pushing, shoving us all in that direction. Right. But it's funny. I think overwhelmingly the change is positive, and it's being received positively. And I think there's going to be, or we're already seeing shifts, cultural shifts within the healthcare organizations, clinically, IT, IS, management-wise, to really embrace it and not push back and just say, all right, well, it makes sense. For us, patients have had the ability to upload through a variety of means for a while. We've talked about it a little bit. The solution we have gives us the ability to establish portals, for referring sites, but patients as well. So, if they happen to come in with a disc, they can hand it to a front desk person who can upload it immediately into their medical record, kind of establishing that very quick turnaround time. But they can also do it from home. We have a lot of groups within our organization that we've set up on this platform with links that they can provide patients that are direct. They can answer questions that are specific to them, that are important to get the patient through the process quickly and efficiently. And it has been a big satisfier. And again, it's one of these problems that existed for so long, we didn't have a great answer for it. Then after just a little bit of time where we've been, embracing these new solutions, that all of a sudden, issues, we were having phone calls from clinics, phone calls from patients, feedback that was not positive about the experience have really just diminished. And the issues we're having now are unique to where we're at currently, but it's been a big positive for us. And that's changed, just to answer that last part of that question, over time dramatically in the turnaround time, the way that people can do this, and just generally the experience. And one part that we do have to be sensitive to is, I think on the IT side, we can get a little bit narrow focused and like, all right, here's the technology, click this button, you do that, boom, you're done, and off you go. And a lot of people understand that. A lot of people out in the community are able to embrace that kind of technology and change. But I think Lori mentioned sometimes that remote support element still exists in a very strong way for us, where some people just, it's not easy for them, and we have to be ready to answer those questions and willing. And so that's one of those things that we still get a little bit of, but people are starting to understand it a little bit better. And then overall patient experience wise, we are offering patients the ability to view their imaging through our EMR patient portal, which has been we didn't quite know what to expect in terms of how quickly it would be embraced. We didn't do a big marketing campaign or anything like that, and it was near instantaneous. We flipped the switch, and people were doing this. And it's actually we've heard anecdotally some great conversations that are happening between patients and their clinical care providers as a result of having access to this imaging. So it's really been kind of a neat time to be a part of this process, that we're starting to open doors for patients to access their information that used to be, a phone call, you're paying for something, you have to go in to pick up a disc. People just weren't going to do it, where now they could just, from the comfort of their home, go on a computer and be able to start making decisions and have access to information they previously didn't.
That's really fantastic to hear. I think, again, going back to stakeholders and thinking about end users, when you do enable the patients to have the keys to be able to upload their imaging, it's really important to think about usability and support, because you're dealing with a very broad and diverse patient population who have varying levels of comfort with technology, the process, the security of it all. And so I think that becomes really integral in the decision-making. Lori, any other comments you want to add in regards to uploading or distribution of imaging to patients?
We similar to what Matt said, we do also have the ability for patients to view reports and also images through the patient portal. And I think one of the things that has, and as Matt said, that was immediately successful, the vast majority of, I think the largest majority of clicks or accessing of images within our enterprise viewer is now patients. So it's huge, and people are really looking at their images. One of the things that has improved that, though, was up until the Cures Act, we had an embargo on results, which if the result isn't there, the images aren't there either. So we were delayed on some of our studies, PETs, CTs, MRs, by in some cases 48 hours, because of the allowing providers to talk to families about those results before they read the results themselves for some situations. But that's gone now. So all the embargoes are removed, and patients now have 100% immediate access, which our turnaround times are within a couple of hours generally for every study in our department. So it's very much available now, which is great.
That's awesome. So keeping an eye on the time, and I definitely want to allow enough time for this next section, which is really about research and taking advantage of this imaging data for research purposes. Jen, I'm going to start with you for this next question. Talk to me about the biggest challenge from your perspective for a provider that is interested in utilizing their imaging data for a research project. I think there's a lot of considerations around, the data and accessing it itself, but also the security, the readiness of the data, et cetera. I know that you're involved in a lot of this work at Cincinnati Children's, so I'd love to hear from your perspective, your process in sort of getting these research projects ready to go.
Yeah, we're a big research institution here. We have a lot of docs, and especially in radiology, who are performing research and are looking to get a lot of studies from outside institutions. And so I think, probably the biggest challenge is how are we going to get those here, and how are we going to do it easily and efficiently and safely. And, for years it was discs, and, how do we get the discs here, and mailing and overnight charges to get, these things here quickly. But now, we're able to, now they want to try and do it as fast as possible and as easily as possible. So I think getting them here safely, and, we've been able to implement a solution for that at Children's, using electronic image transfer, and it works well for us. We're able to have multiple sites connected to a single trial at any time. It's set up, you can configure it most any ways you want, but allowing them to have multiple sites, not just internal staff, but multiple outside sites connected to one trial, I think that's also a big plus. They want to be able to have outside reviewers, and you don't always want to give outside reviewers access to your PACS.
Right.
And so being able to do that, that works well. So I think, getting them here and having them safely here, and we did have some trouble with security and outside institutions with security, but usually we worked with the vendors and other sites, and most of the time we can get past that. It may take a little time for them to get through their security red tape, but after that we usually were able to work through it and then get this in place. And it's easy when you can send somebody a link and they can just upload their images directly to you. Unfortunately, a lot of times you hear, "Oh, I have to put the CD in to upload the images to you," but hopefully we'll get past that part as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, you've got multiple users, multiple sites, a lot of collaborators involved.
Yes.
I think security becomes a heightened consideration here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Matt, I know UCSD is doing a ton of research as well. Anything you want to add to this question?
Yeah, no, research is a interesting kind of complete separate thing to this whole, but part of the same, right? The data is there. We need to get it anonymized. That's a big challenge, making sure that obviously PHI is removed. There's no question about that. We also have a big active clinical trials department, which has a similar component, but where they're providing, kind of direct clinical care as a result of the information. I see one of the big challenges, at least here at UCSD with research, is kind of departmental needs versus enterprise needs, silos in some cases where the information needed varies drastically from place to place. So there's going to be an importance to building a centralized, I think, sort of research PAC system that allows a central place where policy procedure can be applied to how the imaging data is handled, how it gets from place to place, and then who has access to it. Like Lori and Jenner have mentioned, we're a very research heavy institution. So there's so many people across the width and breadth of the whole enterprise that need access to research. They're doing very, very important work that revolves around the research data. So we certainly don't want to be a bottleneck. And I think at times we can be kind of being in the middle here between the imaging being created and the researchers needing it and the clinical folks. It's really an evolving situation here at UCSD, just kind of the ebb and flow of all these different needs. And then the only other part in terms of challenges I see is related to data storage and cost. So there's all the different rules and policies and laws that relate to how long imaging needs to be retained from a clinical perspective. And then on the research side of the house, a lot of times they want data to be kept nearly indefinitely for obvious reasons. And so it's kind of a delicate balancing act between how do we handle the request for research data and how long do we keep it and where do we put it and costs and all that sort of thing. So the question is great, and it's still an open question in our mind exactly how we're going to address this, but there's some really neat things happening in the research world, obviously. And so, we're embracing it and we're heading down that path.
Awesome. Jen, back to you. What would be your key recommendation for folks who are on when selecting a vendor to leverage for research at your organization? Maybe kind of back to the key considerations question that we had previously.
Yeah, I think probably the biggest, especially if you're going to go with a cloud archive, is keep diagnostic viewing capabilities, so that radiologists can view those, in as well as at least that's what we hear from our docs. They want to be able to view those images like they would any other clinical images. They may not be putting a dictation on them, but they want to be able to view them in that manner. So I think a strong viewer, a strong diagnostic viewer there would be an important a thing to look at. Also, tools, measurements tools, any ways to manipulate the images, on that archive. Allowing them to be able to do that. I think that if people are used to the PACS, at least in our institution, our radiologists want the same abilities in research. Yeah, they want to be able to do the same thing. So we hear it all the time. And so, we have a research PACS here, which helps with our storage issues. And as Matt said, they want things kept indefinitely. So our research practice continues to grow. But yeah, they definitely want the tools that are available from a clinical perspective as well as a research perspective.
Awesome. We've got one final question in this section that I'm going to turn to Morris for, and then I definitely want to leave some time for some of the good questions we have coming in from the attendees. I think, whenever we start talking about research, very quickly, AI is a topic that comes up. And so, Morris, maybe to reframe this question slightly, I think AI is being relied on more heavily to break down barriers to image access. In the conversations that you're having with providers, how are you seeing these types of tools being leveraged? Are they improving workflows? What does the adoption look like, et cetera?
I'd love to kind of piggyback off of Jen's response, because the insight she's conveying around the unification of research and clinical practice, where you're thinking about it in much the same way. I think we're starting to see AI infuse that as well, where there's a lot of experimentation going on right now, and people want to be able to integrate it into their workflow. So the daily workflow is the key criteria. And what Jen is describing on the research side, I hear on when we're going to instantiate new AI technical capabilities. And I think there's a long way to go, but I think we're on one of those exponential curves where it seems the changes seem small at the beginning and then are going to rapidly change the way we do things. It's clearly never, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't believe it's replacing radiologists. I think it is like any other tool we have implemented, whether it's better modalities or better automation, whatever it is, it's going to make people better care providers, and it's going to help people get better faster and see more people. So we do have a long way to go, but it is there today, and it is happening. So it's an exciting time.
I'll turn it out to our panelists. Any other commentary from any of you on AI and the role that it's starting to play at your organization?
I think what Mark says is correct. We have a lot of radiologists here who want AI and who want to use it. And, I'm not necessarily involved in it as much, but we hear about it a lot, that they want that involved in their workflow and how can they integrate that. And even from a research, on the research side as well, they want, a lot of machine learning is being done here and then into different other AI realms, they want that, I don't think they're fearful of it taking their job at all. They just want it to, be able to help them, get these diagnoses better and help patient care as much as they can.
Yeah, Matt.
Yeah, well, Morris, just that visual you gave of this exponential curve, I think is very accurate for UCSD. I mean, the idea that the talk of AI in the clinical context has been happening for a little while now, and I don't think it got a whole lot of interest initially, but that's certainly changing. And I think through COVID, for example, there was a lot of clinical use cases where they were able to utilize machine learning AI to better their clinical decision making and speed that process. So I do think here, at least at UC San Diego Health, that's kind of the path we're on. So that's an interesting comment.
Awesome. So we've got just a handful of minutes left. So I'm going to jump to some of the questions that have come in. I don't think we're going to have time for all of them, but as Morris said previously, we'll make sure that we follow up with all the attendees with answers to the questions that have been submitted. This first one is actually about that patient access piece we discussed, the patient portals piece. I'd love to hear from you all on the financial impact to your organizations by the amount of patients accessing their imaging via these portals.
I'll jump in. So it's a great question, and one we're still trying to wrap our head around. We had to make at the outset, prior to turning on the option for patients to access their imaging directly, we asked around. We went to folks with kind of regionally as well as across the nation that we knew were doing different. Maybe they're using different technologies, but just to try to gauge or understand better what they were seeing in their patient communities in terms of usage. So we built in financially some buffer based on some of these assumptions for patient usage, and so far, unfortunately for us, we're trending within that within that window. But now that our leadership, upper leadership at our organization, is very excited about this, so and you never quite know how that's going to work out, but I think that it's been a positive development. As leadership here sees the impact and the usefulness of patients having access to their data, I think it's going to adjust the way we're able to address it financially. So still an open question for us exactly how it's going to work out ultimately, but I think our leaders at our organization are embracing it, which is great.
That's awesome to hear. Lori or Jen, anything on just financial impact of access to patients' images?
I guess what I can add is that we were able to use a system that we already own, and accessing images from our existing archive, our enterprise archive. And so I don't think we had a huge financial impact from it. And I would recommend that if you can use something that you already have and not reinvent the wheel. And I think that was something we were looking to avoid, was having to recreate our archive in the cloud so that patients could access those images. And that's probably where the biggest cost comes from, it would be my guess. And we didn't have to do that. So that's a consideration.
Right. I know when we're talking to customers, it's, thinking both about the additive impact of investing in a new solution, but also thinking about the cost savings, right, of switching to an electronic way of sending images versus the costs associated with CDs, administrative staff time required to burn CDs, couriering CDs, et cetera. So I think there's impact on both sides. One final question with about, a minute and a half left. We talked a lot about opening access up to patients, referring providers, other stakeholders to send in imaging. Is there concern and or worry, or how are you thinking about the potential of, bad data or, potential viruses, et cetera? Is that a concern for you? And if so, how do you mitigate it?
So for us, yeah, it's definitely a concern, right? I mean, from across there's security concerns, as well as just workflow concerns with bad data. One of the things we've tried to do here on the sort of the not security, but the bad data side, is really work collaboratively with the vendors to just give this feedback. Say, for example, our switch from PACS teams or PACS kind of focused teams to this idea of enterprise imaging. I think that's applicable across the spectrum, where we can work with the vendors, we can work internally with different folks within the IT system to say, this is our reality now. This is a good thing. These are good changes that are happening, but there's going to be challenges that come with it, like you're going to get data from across the world that looks a little bit differently, and we need to be able to work with our interface team to ingest some of these formats that are a little bit different, that sort of thing. And then on the security side, obviously a huge concern, and we're reminded of it daily, unfortunately. So that's just working collaboratively again with the vendors, as well as our IS security and folks along the way, just to make sure we're staying on top of this and hopefully ahead of the curve.
And in the final seconds, Lori or Jen, anything to add to that question?
Yeah, I think I would agree with what Matt had said, and we get bad data from other institutions sometimes. So the security risk is always there. There's security risks in so many different things. So you just have to be as smart as you can, and we hopefully your security team is doing the scans that needs to do, and we catch what we can catch, but I think it's still needed, being able to give patients that ability. So working with the vendor, showing them what you have that might be we don't want, and going from there.
Awesome. Well, a huge thank you to our panelists, Lori, Matt, Jen, and Morris. This was such a fantastic conversation. I know I learned a ton, and it's just so valuable hearing different perspectives from folks facing these types of challenges, how you're tackling them. A big thank you to everybody who attended today's webinar. Hopefully it was as informative for you as it was for me. And we'll be following up with the any unanswered questions that were sent in. So thanks for everybody. Thanks to everybody for their engagement, and have a wonderful rest of your day.